That roughly means about 40 million customers will get added on to Bharti. That's 4 crore customers. The merger is on a debt-free, cash-free basis. All past liabilities and dues that are attached to that part of Tata's business will be settled by Tata, except for a very small amount of unpaid spectrum liability that Bharti Airtel will assume. Along with the customers, Bharti Airtel will also get, additions to its spectrum pool. This is specifically additional spectrum in the 1800, 2100 and 850 megahertz bands. All of these are bands widely used for 4G, as the company has pointed out. It will also give Bharti Airtel the right to use Tata's existing fiber network. This is the deal so far, and effectively what it allows to do is it allows the Tata Group to make the best use of its currently not very valuable telecom asset, an asset that has been deeply in debt and an asset that they've been considering potentially shutting down. They take the consumer part of that business, they pass it on to Bharti Airtel, adding to Bharti's strength in the marketplace, whereas the enterprise part of the telecom business will continue with Tata, is what we've understood so far. I'm sure that there will be, as a result of this, some stake in Bharti that will accrue to Tata's, but there is no mention in this media statement of that at all. I assume they cannot be giving away their consumer mobile business for free, so there must be something that the Tatas get, unless they have arrived at a value that is so diminished by the debt that comes with this, though even Tatas will take over the debt. There must be something in exchange, but it's not detailed here as yet. Sorry.
So what they're saying is, as of now, the merger is debt-free and cash-free basis.
Yeah.
So they might give in few, Bharti Airtel might give in few shares for the spectrum that has some value, spectrum and the customer base. Now, it will be giving around, what, 4 crore customer base to Bharti Airtel, and Bharti Airtel has around 28 crore customer base now, and it will go up to 32 crore. Now, if you see the spectrum asset that Tata Teleservices has, it has around, what, 178.5 megahertz of spectrum, but of that, only 71 is liberalized, and rest of it is administered spectrum. Now, if Bharti Airtel wants to use this spectrum, they will have to pay a liberalization cost. And in fact, the validity of this administered spectrum is also till 2021. So it's just for next 4 years that Bharti Airtel will like to use it. Now, if you see the breakup, most of the liberalized spectrum is in the 2100 megahertz, and then followed by 1800, and very small portion is in 800, which is the most valuable as of now, the 800 megahertz band.
Right.
And also they said that some of the spectrum liability will go on. I assume, if you see the latest figure that we had, Tata Teleservices closely has around 15,853 crore of spectrum liability. This is only the spectrum part that I'm talking about.
Correct.
So that's a huge amount.
No, but I don't think that it says here that Bharti Airtel will assume a small portion.
Small portion.
Yeah, so we don't know how much.
So I assume it should be of the liberalized spectrum, so that is 71.3 megahertz, because I don't think so they are going to take in any debt.
Let's get in one more voice on this, Sumit. We've got Kunal Bajaj, a well-known telecom analyst, joining us. He is an expert and consultant. Kunal, thanks very much for joining us. This does seem like potentially the only option that the Tatas had besides winding down the business. Would you say that they've arrived at a good deal?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good to speak to you guys. So it's going to be difficult to see whether it's a good deal until some of the details come out, because like you said, it's cashless and debtless. So obviously there's going to be such a severely diminished value to whatever's left. Plus, if Airtel intends to surrender a lot of the spectrum and not transfer it over because it's non-liberalized, then clearly, they're not going to be getting too much in terms of value. So we don't expect Tata to get a lot in terms of shares out of Airtel. But, you're right. We've been hearing the new Tata chairman speaking in the past week about consolidating and about rationalizing their business lines. And I think this is one of the biggest ones that they had to address as soon as possible. And this seems to be the only viable exit. Otherwise, probably the only other option would have been to shut the company down altogether.
That's right. From what we understand, the Tata Group has said that it's also in initial stages of exploring the combination of its enterprise business with Tata Communications, which is another Tata Group business, former or erstwhile VSNL, and its retail, fixed line and broadband business with Tata Sky, and they will look at this further transaction. So effectively what they're trying to do is make, the best disposal of the various parts of Tata Teleservices, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. A lot of the value, a lot of the long-term customers, obviously the people who bring the highest revenue and the highest margins to the business really do come from the Tatacom or the erstwhile VSNL business, like you said. And they've been very successful with that business over the years. They've had some very big-ticket acquisitions overseas many years back. acquiring cable networks like Tyco, acquiring IP networks, data centers, and things like that. And that has always been a very well-run, successful business. And the India leg of that business, with the fiber network that Tata has been able to control and the enterprises that they've had to serve, has had a very long, customer retention period. So it makes sense that Tata will choose to continue to retain that. That they would look at other parts of their of the group companies that would go into. And likewise with the retail business, they have a very extensive landline and broadband business. And it's been said before that Tata Sky has always looked at how to potentially get into the broadband businesses into the future. And this may be one way to augment their goodwill and their brand name and get deeper into customer homes.
Now, stay with us. I'm bringing into the conversation my colleague Sajid Mangat. So effectively, we have Somit and Sajid, both from Bloomberg Quinn, to help us analyze this, and Kunal stays on with us. I just want to try and break this up in terms of what this means for Bharti Airtel, because that really is the listed company, and that's what the markets will be looking to try and assess. And then we'll also try and look at what it means for the Tata Group as a whole, because let's not forget, several Tata Group listed companies also have exposure to Tata Teleservices, and the sort of winding down Tata Teleservices or winding up Tata Teleservices would have also meant a big hit for them based on the proportion of their shareholding in that company. So first up, what this means for Bharti Airtel. And Kunal, my question is to you. It gets an additional 40 million customers. It claims that it will have to pay a very small portion of the unpaid spectrum liability of Tata. It claims that it will not have any exposure to the liabilities and dues that pertain to this consumer telecom business. It claims that the transaction will give it an indefeasible right to use part of the existing fiber network of Tata, and it also says that it will. There was one more bit that I wanted to try and bring up. Okay, no, sorry. I think that pretty much runs it up. So, do you believe this is a good deal for Tata, Bharti Airtel, though we don't know what it will be giving Tata in exchange?
So in terms of what Airtel's been trying to do, I think they've been trying to consolidate by getting scale in the industry, and part of acquiring Uninor was not only for some small amounts of that spectrum really, but also for some of the subscribers. Here, I think they get a lot more than in that deal, because even though they're talking about maybe not spectrum that's going to be lasting very long, but at least the subscriber numbers are quite significant. But I would say the best part of the deal is probably going to be in the fiber network assets. So depending on how that's structured and how much it is exactly, there's certainly a lot of value in that, because with rising data consumption in the industry, the fact that more sites and towers need to be fiberized increasingly, and you're talking about a lot of, a national traffic growth as well, it certainly helps to have those fiber reserves and access available to you.
Okay, my next question that I want to put is to both Somit and Sajid. I know Somit's crunched these numbers, and then Kunal come in later on this. What is Bharti getting in terms of quality of customer from Tata Tele, right? Do we have any information on the ARPUs of these customers, what their data usage is, etc., etc.?
The customers that Tata Teleservices has, it's not all high ARPU customers, they're low ARPU customers, because they fall into the 2G and 3G band, not 4G band, so they are not high ARPU customers. So the revenue contribution that they will bring into Bharti Airtel's book will be very low.
Do we have any estimations of what that revenue
No, there's no estimate, because Tata Teleservices is an unlisted entity, they don't report all numbers, so that ARPU is something that we don't have.
But is there an average ARPU we can assume per customer of that 40 million, and somehow work out what the potential additional revenue could be for Bharti? Kunal, would you have those numbers on the tips of your fingers?
Sorry, not off the top of my head.
Okay. All right. I'm going to make one last-ditch effort to see if Sajid has worked this out already. Sajid, 4 crore customers additionally. What is the average ARPU that you'd say these customers have?
Around 100.
Oh, okay. So that doesn't amount to much then in terms of additional revenue?
The average ARPU would be around between 90 to 100.
So from a point of view of adding to top line, from the point of view of adding to Bharti's top line, Sajid, how substantial will this deal be?
Not at all, because they have a top line of what, annual top line of 1 lakh.
It's going to, it won't have any impact, because what I've been speaking to many people is that it's primarily an asset deal and not a, it also involves customers there, but by the time the entire transactions get completed, the number of customers that may move on to Bharti would be very low, and that we have seen in the past deals as well, whenever such mergers have happened where a spectrum is acquired required, and as a result of customers also move on there, it is there. So from Bharti's point of view, yes, you're going to get goods, you're going to get spectrum in 850, 1800 and 2100 megahertz. You will have 71 megahertz of liberalized spectrum, and for others it is administered spectrum, for which Bharti may have to pay the residual amount
I just wanted to know
to the
first up.
government.
Sajid, we'll come to the
From
spectrum in
overall
just a bit. I just wanted to know first up what the addition to top line will be. I know you're saying it's not substantial in any fashion. Samit, you want to add to that Bharti addition to top line conversation that we were having? Then we'll get to spectrum.
It would be very low because Bharti has a top line of what, more than close to 1 lakh annually, and this will add around not more than 4,000 to 5,000 crore. So it's very few, just 5%. No, not even, yeah, 5% close to.
So close to 5% to top
annually,
line.
yeah.
Annually, right? Okay, fine. So that deals with the customer numbers. Now we'll analyze the spectrum a little bit. Kunal, both you and Samit made the point that some of this is, as you pointed out, not liberalized spectrum, and therefore there will have to be payments to liberalize it, and there will also be a deadline within which the spectrum will expire, so to speak, or will have to be repurchased in some fashion. Yeah. So what do they effectively get net in terms of additional spectrum? The cost potentially of that spectrum, can we assess that, and therefore is it on a spectrum basis the right kind of deal to do?
On a spectrum basis, yeah, because getting 1800 is difficult in this moment, and it has around, according to my calculations, it would have around 11 megahertz of 800 megahertz spectrum, which is also very difficult to get. It's not difficult, it's very costly to get, I would say that. So that would be the liberalized spectrum, for which Bharti Airtel might be giving shares to Tata Teleservices. For administered spectrum, I don't know, we'll have to figure out what is the validity it has. It has a validity of around
3 more years, 4 years.
3 or 4 more years. And when it comes to liberalize, the validity varies from 2030 to 2035, because these spectrums are recently bought, the 1800 megahertz and 2100 megahertz. So these do have a longer validity, but the valued spectrum are 800 and 1800.
Got it. Kunal, would you have, off the top of your head, any idea of what this spectrum would have cost? Were it to be just simply part of a trading transaction, and what it might amount to in terms of maybe Bharti wanting to give some shares to Tata, if that's what the agreement is? So I should warn viewers that there is no mention of any such thing in the media statement that the company has put out.
Yeah. So it's I agree with your colleagues that clearly it's for the 1800 and not for the CDMA spectrum, because if you've only got 3-4 years of validity left and most of that's unliberalized, then there's not a lot of value there. So it's really the value of the 1800. I guess one could simply figure that out basis the last auction value, but but you're correct in that the challenge here is the availability. So there would obviously be a premium. So if one were to look at it on a trading or a pure buy-sell kind of transaction between the two, would certainly be at some sort of premium, because that spectrum's hard to come by. But what this will certainly do is, and without doing the math, is will make Airtel, undoubtedly amongst basically the strongest in terms of their spectrum holding. Because with Vodafone and Idea coming together, their spectrum holding was going to balloon and become quite substantial, especially in the 1800 bands, because both had very good 1800 holdings across the country. And I think this will give a lot of that, resources that Airtel would need to continue to push through on LTE in a more favorable band. Even though they've had a big push on 2300 and TDD spectrum, but this will really help in getting FTD spectrum for LTE available to them.
And how do we understand, Kunal, what the terms of trade would be in this case? Because, obviously they're not getting the spectrum fully free. They've mentioned in the media statement that Bharti will assume a small portion of the unpaid spectrum liability of Tata. But above that, I'm sure that they're paying Tata something for this, right? Yeah. That would be fair to assume. Now, what would that amount be? What should that value be? Is there any way to ascertain that right now?
No, I mean, it's, there's no scientific way necessarily to assign what the premium that one should pay vis-a-vis the balance payments that are left to the government, because, the premium will be because of a lack of availability and because of not having to go through an auction process and things like that. So, meaning a lack of availability in the market. So, but again, it's not going to be huge, because Airtel does have a very significant spectrum bank today. So it's not like they're in a situation today like they were, say, 3 or 4 years ago, where people were looking for a lot of spectrum still at that time, and LTE was early, and it was difficult to say what direction spectrum availability would go in. In the latest auction, lots of stuff went unauctioned as well, lots of spectrum bands. So in that context, there will be a premium, but it won't be very, very high.
Okay, Kunal, stay on with us. I think Sajid wanted to make a point on this. Sajid?
Yeah, my understanding after speaking to people in Bharti is that they are not going to pay any cash for this entire transaction. What they told me very categorically is that the deferred spectrum liability is to the tune of nearly 8 to 9,000 crores. So they will be paying a small part of that as and when that the spectrum liability comes up for and they have to pay it to the government.
Small part of 8 to 9,000 crores. Now, what does small mean? Can you give me an idea? I can hear you. Can you hear me clearly? What does small quantify? How do you assess what small is?
Yeah. Small quantify. So that's the detail that we need to get from there. There won't be any cash payment as such. It would be payment for this deferred spectrum that will happen going forward.
They've said very clearly this is a cash-free, debt-free transaction.
So the Tata, so the Tata Group, yes, it's a cash-free, debt-free transaction on the books of Tata Teleservices and Tata Tele Maharashtra. There is a spectrum liability which is there to return 8 to 9,000 crores. A large part of that would be paid by Tata, as in when it comes up for when it comes for payment, and remaining part is something which Bharti would pay once the entire merger is complete. So when Bharti gets a spectrum, the liberalized spectrum, and it has to pay as part of the normal course of operation, it will be paying that amount, and we would have to see how much time will it take for that to happen. So it's not going to be a cash payment or anything, but it could be a normal operational payment. So it's a liability which goes into the balance sheet of Bharti, but only to the tune of whatever it has to pay. Remember, Tata Teleservices Maharashtra did acquire some spectrum in Mumbai, and that was marquee spectrum, and that spectrum will now go to Bharti, because Bharti will get additional spectrum in Mumbai as part of that.
All right. I want to acknowledge that we have joining us now Nitin Soni of Fitch Ratings. And Nitin, I do want to come to you with a question, but I want to finish the spectrum point one so that our viewers get a clear sense of what Bharti stands to gain from spectrum. Samit, have you done any quick back-of-the-envelope calculations? 178.5 megahertz of spectrum, of which 71.3 is liberalized, the rest is not. This is in the 850, 1800 and 2100 megahertz bands. Now, if Sajid is saying that the spectrum liability is 8 to 9,000 crores and Bharti will assume some part of that, which is that some part of that debt will get transferred to Bharti, that is really the terms of trade, right? That's the payment for getting 40 million customers. What is the value of 178.5 megahertz of spectrum? What should we assume? How much of that debt do you think Bharti will be assuming?
Of the 178 megahertz, I wouldn't value anything for the administered spectrum, because for that they anyways have to pay a liberalization cost.
So then we have to just value the 71.3 megahertz of liberalized spectrum.
That is valuable for Bharti Airtel. What I think is they'll give up the administered spectrum and they'll retain the liberalized spectrum, for which they'll have to take in the spectrum liability that comes in with that spectrum.
Okay, let's get Nitin's voice on it. Nitin, good afternoon or good evening. Interesting deal. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think it's quite a good deal for both Tata and Bharti. I mean, Tata obviously benefits from, they will be relieved of the cash burn which was happening in the operations. And given the high intensity of the competition in the market right now, I mean, on a standalone basis, they would have been very difficult for them to survive. So it's a good deal for Tata to get rid of, loss-making operations. And in a good deal for positive for Bharti as well, as they are getting 40 million consumers and significant amount of spectrum, which would help them in future to strengthen their 4G networks and to compete effectively against Jio because of that. And I don't think, as you're asking questions to the other speakers, I don't think there will be a lot of cash involved in this deal, because it looks like a desperate deal from the point of view of Tata to get this done.
Did you say you don't think there would be a lot of cash involved in this deal? Nitin, did you say you don't think there would be a lot of cash involved in this deal?
Yeah,
Now, well,
I
they've
don't
said
think
they've
so.
made it very clear
Maybe
there
there
is
could
no
be
cash
some.
involved. Sorry, the media statement from the
I
company
don't
says
think so.
debt-free, cash-free basis. So no cash involved whatsoever.
Yeah, so I don't think there is any debt or cash should maybe involved in this deal. There could be some equity swap, maybe some Tata shareholders.
So we thought of that as well, but my colleague Sajid,
So
who's been speaking with both companies, suggests that there is going to be no equity swap either. There is simply just going to be the assumption of certain spectrum-based liabilities that will transfer from Tata's to Bharti.
it's very similar to the Telenor deal. It's very similar to the Telenor's deal where, basically Telenor's transferred all their operations and wireless networks without any debt on their balance sheet. So that debt had to be taken care by the Telenor in that case, and in this case by Tata. And they're basically saving themselves for the future cash burn, which would have happened because of the intense competition by Jio.
So in this case, now, just what I'm going to ask you, right? I know you've been fairly negative on telecoms in India simply because of, like you pointed out, the cash burn, the Jio angle, the high level of indebtedness, depending on which operator you're talking about. Would you stand at all concerned from the Bharti point of view? Because here they're getting 40 million customers or 4 crore customers. They're getting a decent amount of spectrum, which is liberalized. And of course, they'll assume some debt on account of that spectrum, but they're not paying any cash. Do you think that this is therefore a good deal for Bharti? Nitin?
Is that question to me?
Yes, it is to you.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think, as I said, I think it's a very good deal from Bharti's point of view.
Okay.
And overall from industry perspective, because, the industry has rapidly consolidated. And it's amazing to see that in a span of 1 year, this industry has, rapidly consolidated into 3 large players now. And, increasingly, I'm thinking that, the average revenue per user has kind of bottomed out at, 150 rupees for Bharti in the last quarter. And maybe we could see some inflection point, some recovery in, starting 2018, when Jio would start rationalizing its tariff in some ways, so stop giving so much of discounts and promotions. So I think, it's a very good deal from an industry perspective. And, the other deals, including, the exit of Telenor, Arcom's, gradually shutting down operations. Airtel is also in a bit of a distress. So the tail of the industry is gone, and you have 3 large players now, which is actually the correct structure for any telco market anywhere in Asia or in the world. And I think that makes a lot of sense for the medium to longer term health of the industry to have 3 big players and some pricing power coming back to these players.
Nitin, Sunil Bharti Mittal would agree with you, because he's been saying this for the longest time, that he thought that India was an irrational market because it had so many players, and he anticipated over a period of time we'd come down to 5. Last when I spoke to him, he said, I didn't think we'd be 3 so quickly, but 5 is what he had anticipated. You pointed out that we're down to 3. My colleague Somit has a question for you.
The debt, that the spectrum liability that Bharti Airtel will have to take in, will that impact Bharti Airtel's credit rating in any way, because it's still an additional debt that they're taking in?
No, so we rate Bharti on a BBB minus with a stable outlook. And as you know, that recently Indian government has allowed deferred spectrum payments to be paid over 16 years rather than 10 years. So we don't think that additional spectrum liabilities, which anyway in the case of Tata would not be that significant because most of the spectrum was acquired, before this whole auction mechanism started. So I don't think that adds to a lot of liabilities on the deferred spectrum for Bharti. So it's actually a credit positive deal for Bharti in my view.
But their intentions have been to lower that debt. In fact, they have been selling stake in Bharti Infratel for that matter. But and again here they are taking in debt. They could have done a share deal also rather than taking debt. So don't you think still that will impact Bharti Airtel, because EBITDAs have been falling and it is expected to further fall?
No, as we discussed, so it's a debt-free, cash-free deal. The only liability they may be taking would be deferred spectrum liabilities, which are supposed to be paid over the remaining time period over the spectrum life, and that have elongated by the recent action by the Indian government to allow it to be paid over 16 years. So in terms of the actual cash payment for the deferred spectrum liability on a yearly basis, I don't think that will be significant. And in my view, that will not affect Bharti's rating.
Nitin, I don't know if you look at Tata Tele at all, given that it's unlisted. A couple of quick takeaways for Tata Tele. It holds on to all the liabilities attached to the consumer telecom business. Those are not being transferred. It continues to have to find a solution for the enterprise business, which it says it will consider exploring a combination of its enterprise business with Tata Communications and its retail fixed line and broadband business with Tata Sky. But we still don't know if any part of that will fructify soon. The positive, though, is that Tata will retain its stake in Viom. That's the tower arm. Do you look at Tata Teleservices at all? Does this give you any sense of relief in terms of the highly indebted situation at Tata Tele and some effort to resolve that now?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we do look at Tata Tele as a comparison with, we rate Reliance Communication and Bharti Airtel in India and Reliance Industries as well. I mean, as I said, I think it's quite a good move for Tata, and that they have got rid of this loss-making operations. I mean, they have been in this industry for a very long time and never managed to crack this market, never managed to gain a significant market share. I mean, they started with maybe a wrong technology, CDMA, and during the course of their operations, they changed to GSM. And given the intense competitive intensity we have seen, in the last 5 to 10 years in this market, and recently exacerbated by Jio's operations, they are never going to make these operations profitable. So it would have been very difficult on a standalone basis for them to survive in this market from here onwards. And also the fact that they don't have sufficient spectrum assets to roll out 4G. And mind you, I mean, 4G has become so important in this industry now that, if you have to compete with Jio, you will need to have 4G spectrum across all 22 Indian circles and provide a good internet quality to an average consumer. So they would have no chance to survive in this market, and that's why it's a good move for them to exit from the industry. And I think they have done a good bit to save the Tata brand, that they're not shutting down the operations. I mean, there are thousands of employees whose jobs are at risk with these operations. So I guess those employees will get transferred to
Nitin, forgive me for interrupting you, but unfortunately, in the middle of all this Tata Tele conversation, we also have the TCS numbers out. So I'm going to ask you and our guest, Mahesh Uppal, to stay on the line with us. Bear with us for just a couple of minutes. We've got to get these numbers to viewers. Sajid, you've got the numbers?
Yes, I have the numbers. For quarter 2 Ind AS, the constant currency revenue growth is 1.7% to 29,584 crores. That's a 1.7% growth in constant currency terms. The PBT margins are at 23.4%. Let me get the numbers again for you. 1.7% growth constant currency terms, revenue at 30,541 crores. The PBT margin is at 25.1%. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, there is a growth in the PBT margin from 23.4% to 25.1%. The net profit is at 6,446 crores. That's a Q&Q jump of 8.4%. And there's a 101 basis point jump in net profit margin as well.
So the index performance Sajid, let me just interrupt you. You said constant currency growth is 1.7%. Volume growth you're referring to, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and you said that margins came in at 25.1%.
It's revenue growth of 1.7%.
And margins at 25.1%. So it's clearly a beat on the margin front. There's no doubt about that. It's clearly a beat on the margin front.
Yes. It is.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't back to the 26 to 28% range, but it's better than the 23 and 24 that they've been doing in the last couple of quarters.
Yeah, I mean on a year-on-year basis, if you look last quarter in Q2, last year in Q2 they had a margin of 26%. So on a year basis, it's still lower, but they have been guiding at a margins coming up over the next few quarters. That's what they've been saying. So 25.1% PBT margin for Q2. The revenue of 30,541 crores.
All right, I get that. Any other color that you can give us from the press release in terms of how some of their key businesses such as BFSI, etc. have done?
I don't have the cotton.
Okay.
No, I don't have that metrics of sector. It's only the first few numbers which are released initially.
Okay.
That includes revenue, PBIT margin, and net profit and net profit margin.
All right.
And all these are excluding other income.
All right. Okay. So I think it looks like it's a reasonable performance.
So the first numbers
by TCS.
are out basically, which is pretty much in line with.
Yes, it's pretty much in line. That's Ajit
right.
there at the TCS headquarters trying to toggle between TCS and the Tata Teleservices deal that was just announced with Bharti Airtel. Hopefully, we will have Agam on in just a couple of minutes. But just to run the numbers by you, and these are the numbers flashing on your screen as you can see, a 5.6% jump in net profit, constant currency volume growth in at 1.7%, and a profit margin that's come in at 25.1%. Those are the key first numbers that we've gotten from TCS. We're waiting for some more detail and the fine print on this, and as you can see, a 7 rupee interim dividend announcement that the company has made today. We've got Apurva Prasad, the research analyst at HDFC Securities, joining in to give us some insight into these numbers. Apurva, what do you make of this?
Yeah, prima facie, the margin performance looks to be a strong beat over my estimates. So I think it's largely a strong operational performance. That's my first thoughts on this.
Okay, from what Sajit, my colleague, told me, he's at TCS, constant currency volume growth of 1.7%. Your comment on that?
Yeah, so I mean that's I think volume growth is pretty much in line types. I think it's more on the margin side, which looks like a beat, which is why on the overall profitability seems to be a bit higher. But it's largely to do with the margins.
Anything that you might already know about why they would have been able to offer this margin beat?
No, I'll have to look into more details on that.
Okay. I think, Apurva, we've got Agam joining us, and I know he's been looking at the numbers a lot more closer than I have. Agam?
Apurva, actually, I've been looking at the banking, financial services and insurance together, those numbers, and we're looking at a growth around 3.7%. And revenues stand at around a little over 12,200 crores. This is, of course, in rupee terms. What can you make of these numbers, especially given the fact that, a good, 40% of the revenues come from this sector?
Yes, I think that was primarily the concern, how they would perform on the BFSI, retail and CPG side of it, since these are the core verticals. And historically, these were lagging the company average. So I think BFSI coming back I think it's a good positive indicator, I would say.
And the other concern with TCS's earnings were also the retail segment. That has seen a sequential growth of around 2.3% at a little over 5,100 crores. How would you rate this performance, considering, again, we have a good 19%, 20% odd of total revenues coming from this segment?
Right, that's right. So as I said, I think these two are the core verticals, and core verticals coming closer towards company averages or even beating company averages, something which was important since these were historically lagging and the company had already called out weakness in these two particular verticals. In BFSI, it was largely to do with the North America side of it within BFSI.
I just want to add here, guys, that we've got a comment coming in from Rajesh Gopinathan, the CEO and Managing Director of TCS, and he attributes this performance to large deal wins this quarter, a good pipeline, and the bottoming out of the retail sector.
Right. The concern, Menika, in this particular quarter was that the large deal wins weren't coming through. And if he's saying that in his statement, then it can be considered as a positive. It is also the large deal wins which could be attributed perhaps to the higher than expected margins. Apurva, in the past few quarters, the management has suggested that they will look to get TCS margins to between the band of 26 to 28%. Now, while expectations were very low and very tempered, they've still come up with margins of around 25%. Do you think TCS has the ability to bring this up to 26% in the remaining couple of quarters?
still seems to be pretty high. But yeah, I think they can probably get closer to 26 to 28%, because if you see, the exit rate has to be much higher, for them to really come into that band. But I think anywhere closer to 26%, if they can land, I think that should be a positive.
Okay, I've also got the dollar revenue number, and that stands at around 4,739 million, which is very close to the estimates that we were working with. There is always the case of cross-currency headwinds or tailwinds, for that matter. Apurva, how are you reading the dollar revenues, and what can you tell us about the way currency may have panned out for TCS for this quarter?
Yeah, so I think the revenue side is pretty much closer to where I was estimating, about 47.51, so that's not really a surprise. So as I said, I think it's more on the operational side of the business that looks to be a strong beat.
And what would you look for when it comes to the management once they come and speak to us in the press conference?
Yeah, so I think commentary on, again, the two core verticals, that would be important. Commentary on the regional markets as well as the margin outlook. I think these would be the top of the mind important things to look out for.
Do you have any more detail on how the digital business is fared? Any numbers that they've put in as yet on digital?
No, so they will have the press release. They will have it in the press release. Apurva, do you have any details on that?
Yeah, I think that's grown at about 5.9% Q-on-Q, about 31% YY. So yeah, with that, this continues to outgrow the company average, and a bulk of incremental growth has been coming in from digital. So I think that trend continues. So that's a healthy sign. And I think that makes up now just short of 20%. So it's about 19.7% for this quarter.
So just about a fifth of the business is now digital, is it? And that explains the higher growth rates. I suppose those will start peaking off in a few quarters from now. What else can you tell us about the numbers, if you've spotted anything that we haven't?
Yes, I'll need to look into more details.
Apurva, I just have one question on the legacy business. Given the fact that retail is now, starting to build some momentum in, what do you think their strategy should be when it comes to the legacy businesses? Given the fact that there's such a large quantum of their businesses still come from that area.
So I think they would have to drive a lot more automation within the legacy business. I think that's primarily been the strategy for most of the larger players to retain a part of legacy business. So as you know, there is a lot of cannibalization as a result of that. But I think that's the way forward. So legacy business should continue to grow at the rate at which it's growing. You cannot really expect that to really come up. So the larger delta will obviously be from the digital part of the business.
All right, I think Apurva is trying to tell us politely he needs to get back to the numbers there. Thanks very much for joining us with that quick first take, Apurva. Those are the TCS numbers. What an afternoon this has turned out to be. We've toggled from one Tata Group company to another. Right. And I think all in all, it's not looking like a bad performance at all. Like you've been saying, and like we always know, this is a traditionally strong quarter. This and the next one will be traditionally strong quarters for TCS. I think reasonable constant currency volume growth and a nice little beat on the margin front.
Yes, and Menaka, I think the important thing here is that they made a statement saying that they have started seeing large deals come in, which was an issue in the previous couple of quarters, and that will also be taken as a positive by the investors.
Okay, I think we're waiting to see it. The TCS press conference should start at about 5 o'clock. Quickly, if we can run through any more details that you have at this point in time. You said that we were seeing some signs of strength in the BFSI business, which is really, what, 50% or more than 50% of their total revenue pie, and also some bottoming out in retail?
Yes, so, if you leave the BFSI segment out, the two other important verticals here are retail and consumer business, which has seen about a 2.3% growth quarter on quarter, and communications and media. This is the other segment which contributes to nearly 20% of TCS's consolidated revenues, and that's where we've seen another 4.5% growth on a quarter-on-quarter basis. So this again is, well, largely on expected lines, considering we have seen a lot of momentum in communications, media and technology. But as Apurva was mentioning, the 2.5% growth in the retail and consumer business, which has seen a structural weakness in the previous couple of quarters may be taken as a positive, but we will be waiting for the commentary on this segment as well.
Let me put in a quick last question to Sajid before we wrap this up and toss over to the TCS management. Sajid, any more details that you've been able to glean? Because you're the lucky one, you're on location, you'll have the press release. We're trying to work off, Twitter feeds from TCS and some very basic numbers to the exchange.
You will have to depend on that as well, because we just got the basic numbers, which are the four or five numbers, which are the first numbers that go by, and the remaining investor update, which normally TCS sends out, is to the stock exchanges first, and then it's distributed to the to the journalists who are here. So we're just waiting for the detailed press release which will come in. But it's better
margins,
to look.
Anything beyond what we've already discussed, Sajid?
BFSI, retail, others, nothing. I just have those 4 or 5 basic numbers.
All right, we'll leave you at that. You have a busy evening. You're going to be watching TCS play out in just a few minutes from now. Sajid's at the TCS headquarters, where the management will be joining him and all the other journalists there to walk them through the numbers. And then later on in the evening, we'll come back with more analysis of the Tata Tele Bharti deal. For now, we're going to wrap it up here. Take a quick break, and when you come back, you'll be watching the TCS management walk you through their numbers. Are we live?